The palace stood tall in the glowing night of Valmora Prime. Its spires touched the purple clouds, and golden lights blinked across its bridges. Guards marched in silence, armored and alert, weapons ready in their hands. It was the safest place in the galaxy, or so everyone believed. Queen Viera, ruler of the Zethari Empire, sat on her crystal throne. Her two young daughters, Princess Lyra and Princess Sela, had just gone to sleep in their sky chamber. Their room was surrounded by guards, energy shields, and silent drones. Nothing could go in, and nothing could come out not without being seen. But when the morning star rose, everything changed. The nursemaid entered the room to wake the girls. But the beds were empty, the blankets were cold, and the windows untouched. She screamed, and her voice echoed across the palace walls. Guards rushed in, sensors scanned the room, and alarms began to blare. The queen arrived within minutes, her long silver robe trailing behind her. When she saw the empty beds, her heart stopped. She ran to the window, looked outside, and then dropped to her knees. The entire palace froze. No one could explain how the girls vanished without a trace. The guards who stood outside the chamber swore they saw nothing. The shield never dropped. The cameras showed no entry or exit. Whispers spread like wildfire. Some blamed humans. They were always the easiest to accuse. Others blamed black market slavers, or the rebels hiding in the ice rings. The queen's face turned pale as she listened to each rumor. Within hours, the royal order sent out messages to every corner of the empire. The reward was massive. Anyone who returned the girls safely would be honored beyond measure. But if someone was found guilty of taking them, they would face royal execution. Ships lifted off from the palace docks, carrying soldiers in search teams. The search was wide and furious. Dunes were scanned, rivers drained, and spaceports locked. No one could leave the system without being questioned. Still, the girls were nowhere. No clue, no scream, no scream, far away from the palace. Beyond the mountain ruins and broken mining sites, a human named Jacob wandered alone, scavenging old tech and food scraps. He lived in the dry cliffs, far from cities, far from war. He was once a soldier, but now just a quiet man with a broken past. One morning, he saw something strange near his cave. A piece of silk flapping in the wind, stuck to a branch. It shimmered with royal threads, colors he hadn't seen in years. He walked closer and stopped in shock. Two small figures lay at the edge of a dried-up stream. Both were alien girls, their skin soft blue, their robes dirty but finely stitched. One of them breathed faintly, her lips trembling from cold. The other clung to a broken pendant, shaped like the royal sigil of Zethari. Jacob's mind raced. He knew who they were. He had seen their faces on bounty flyers. But he didn't know how they got here, or why they were alone. He looked up at the sky, thinking maybe someone would come soon. No ships came, no noise, only silence. The girls were clearly weak, hungry, and in danger. He didn't know if the queen would believe him, or if her army would kill him on sight. Still, something inside him moved. He couldn't leave them here. Gently, he lifted the older girl first, cradling her carefully. The younger one whimpered, but he gave her his scarf, warm and soft. He carried them both back to his cave, wrapping them in old blankets. He gave them water, warmed some soup, and watched over them like a silent guardian. Outside, the sun began to set, and shadows stretched across the land. In the skies above, patrol ships flew past, scanning and searching. Jacob sat near the cave entrance, his hand on his old rifle. He knew the world was watching, hunting, and waiting. But tonight, he wasn't a soldier or a fugitive. Tonight, He was just a man who found two lost souls, and deep in his heart, he whispered one promise. No one will hurt you not while I'm breathing. Asterisk, inside a dark cave far from the palace. The two alien princesses slept beside a small fire. Jacob sat at the entrance, holding his old rifle across his lap. His eyes scanned the night, watching for patrol ships or bounty hunters. He knew the Queen's army would tear this planet apart to find her daughters. But right now, they were safe, warm, and breathing. That was all that mattered. The older girl, Lyra, stirred and opened her eyes. Her gaze met Jacob's, and she didn't scream. Instead, she whispered something in her native tongue. Jacob didn't understand the words, but he could feel the fear behind them. He smiled gently and placed a warm bowl of soup near her. She took it with shaking hands, her eyes still wide but calmer now. The younger one, Sela, slept beside her sister, clutching the scarf Jacob had given her. Her tiny face was pale. Her feet were wrapped in torn silk. Jacob looked at them and wondered, how did royal blood end up half dead in the middle of nowhere? He had seen war, death, and betrayal, but this felt different. This wasn't just a kidnapping. This was a message. And someone wanted that message to remain buried. Meanwhile, back in the capital palace, Queen Virea stood in the Hall of Judgment. The search had found nothing, and her fury was reaching its limit. She slammed her staff into the floor, and the sound echoed across the throne room. All planets will be searched again, she said, her voice sharp as steel. If a single citizen hides them, that city will burn. The generals nodded, but fear flickered in their eyes. They had never seen the queen like this. Not since the day her husband died in battle. Now, the loss of her daughters had broken something deeper inside her. She wasn't just ruling, she was hunting. In the command tower, the queen studied dozens of screens. One of them showed a blurry image of a man carrying two small figures in his arms. A human, rough clothes, short beard, and a face filled with concern, not cruelty. She leaned forward and whispered, "Find him, back in the cave." Lyra finally spoke a word Jacob could understand. "Name," she said, pointing at him. Jacob raised an eyebrow, then touched his chest. "Jacob," he replied. Slowly, the girl nodded, then touched her own chest. "Lyra," she pointed at her sleeping sister. Sela. Jacob smiled and repeated, "Lyra, Sela," for the first time. Lyra gave him a tiny smile. Jacob's heart felt heavy. These were just children, lost in a world too cruel for them. He knew he couldn't keep them here forever. But where could he take them? If he went to the wrong people, they'd be killed or sold. If he went to the palace, he might be shot on sight. He turned on his old transmitter and sent out a signal, encrypted and silent, meant only for one Manon, old war friend who now worked in a neutral zone. The message was short. Found royal daughters. Need advice. Trust no one. He turned off the device and waited. Days passed, and the girls began to trust him more. Jacob taught them simple words: food, safe, hide, warm. They laughed when he tripped on a stone, and they hugged him when he gave them dried fruit. Then, one night, Lyra spoke something that chilled him to the bone. Men, masks, chains. Whisper, queen, not find. Jacob froze. She was remembering something, bits of a broken memory. But clear enough, someone had taken them on purpose. And someone powerful didn't want them found. It wasn't just a kidnapping, it was a betrayal. Jacob leaned against the cave wall, his mind spinning. A traitor inside the palace. Maybe even a general. And if the queen didn't know, she was chasing the wrong enemy. Suddenly, a light blinked on his wrist. His old transmitter had picked up a response. But it wasn't from his friend. It was a bounty alert. His location had been pinged. Jacob cursed under his breath and grabbed his rifle. "Lyra, Sella," he whispered. "Hide." They obeyed without question, crawling behind the rocks and covering themselves with blankets. Outside, a low rumble grew louder. Engines, hovering near the cave entrance. Shadowed figures appeared, armed and greedy-eyed, bounty hunters, human and alien. They stepped into the cave with weapons raised. One of them sneered, "We're just here for the royal brats. Hand them over and we'll leave you in one piece." Jacob stood firm, his rifle ready. He didn't speak, he didn't move. He had fought wars, lost friends, and buried truth. But tonight, he would stand between these children and the galaxy's evil. The lead hunter raised his weapon. Then a loud sound burst through the air. A warning shot, fired by Jacob's shaking but steady hands. The hunter stepped back, surprised. Jacob's voice was calm but cold. "Come closer, and none of you leave alive." Outside, the Queen's spy drones picked up the heat signatures and battle sounds in her chamber. The Queen leaned closer. To the screen, the human hadn't harmed her daughters. He was protecting them. Her eyes narrowed, and she whispered, "Who are you, human?" Ashes from the campfire floated gently through the cave. Jacob sat with his back against the cold wall, staring at the flames. Lyra and Sella were curled together under a thick old blanket. Fast asleep, the smoke danced above them, painting shadows across the stone. But Jacob's eyes weren't resting. They were waiting for the next threat, the next noise, the next betrayal. The bounty hunters had left, for now, but Jacob knew they'd be back. And next time, they wouldn't just knock. He checked the edges of the cave again, reinforced the entrance with metal scraps. He placed trip alarms around the path using old tech parts and wire. Each step he took reminded him that he was no longer just a scavenger. He had become something else, something he'd never expected to be again. Protector. When the sun rose, Lyra woke first, her eyes cloudy but sharp. She watched Jacob place a new log on the fire. "Fire. Safe," she said quietly, pointing at the flames. Jacob nodded, then handed her a piece of bread. "Food," he said, slowly. Lyra accepted it and spoke again. "Jacob." "Safe." Jacob looked at her and smiled softly. "You're safe with me," he said. Even if she didn't understand the words fully, then she tapped her chest. "Lyra, safe." She touched her sister's forehead. "Sella, safe." Jacob sat beside her, careful not to startle the girl. Then he took out a small glowing device from his bag. A voice translator, damaged from years of dust and war. He set it between them and activated it. "Try," he whispered. Lyra tilted her head, curious. Then she began to speak. Slowly, haltingly. Her voice was broken. Her words tangled, but meaning bled through. "Dark ship. Men with black face. Chains on hands. Sella cry. I scream. No one here." The translator flickered as it processed the alien words into a rough human voice. Jacob's heart dropped. So it was truth. They were taken by force. And from what she was describing, it wasn't by pirates or wild beasts. It sounded like trained soldiers, or worse, insiders from the palace. Lyra continued, her hands trembling. "They say, Queen, not find you again, push us in cage. Take us to Black Hole Gate." She stopped, her eyes full of tears. Jacob didn't push her. He simply placed a hand gently on her shoulder. She leaned into him, shaking, but no longer afraid of him. Sella woke up later. Weak but smiling when she saw Jacob, she reached toward him, her small fingers tugging at his sleeve. Jacob lifted her gently into his lap, wrapped the blanket around her again. She touched the edge of his beard and giggled softly for a moment. The pain in the room faded. For a moment, They were just a man and 2 children trying to survive. Jacob stood up and went to the back of the cave where he kept his old war trunk. He opened it slowly, dust escaping into the light. Inside, he found a locked case of secure data chip he had pulled from Sella's robes when he first found them. He hadn't opened it yet. Afraid of what it might show, he placed the chip into a reader and connected it to the old monitor. The screen flickered to life, and a single file appeared. Royal eyes only. Jacob entered a military override code 1 he hadn't used since the war ended. The file opened, and his breath caught in his throat. It was a recording fuzzy, but clear enough to show faces. 3 masked figures. One of them, a royal officer. Whispering in the shadows of the palace, they spoke about removing the girls quietly, blaming rebels, and covering the trail with fake evidence. One voice, sharp and commanding, said clearly, "Her Highness will mourn, but she'll never learn the truth. Her throne will be ours soon." Jacob stared at the screen, rage burning behind his calm eyes. Someone from inside the palace had planned everything. This wasn't about ransom or fear, it was a power grab. And now, Jacob had proof. He turned to Lyra, who watched him carefully. He pointed at the screen, and then at her. "You know this man." Lyra nodded slowly. "General Theros." "Mother, trust him." Jacob clenched his jaw. He had heard that name before, cruel commander with ambition as wide as the stars. Now it made sense why the search parties never came close to this region. Jacob knew what he had to do. He had to deliver the girls to someone the Queen trusted without alerting Theros or the royal traders. And he had to do it fast. He quickly packed supplies, wrapped the girls in travel cloaks, and scanned nearby routes. There was a hidden path to the frozen transport tunnel beneath the mountains. Old, unstable, and half-buried, but it could get them close to the Queen's border camp undetected. As the night returned, Jacob lifted Sella onto his back and held Lyra's hand. He looked back at the cave one last time. Then they stepped out into the cold wind, the stars watching silently from above. Behind them, the fire died down, leaving only ashes and a broken recording of betrayal. Ahead of them, danger waited in every shadow, but so did truth, and maybe redemption. Snow fell slowly, covering the dead trees and frozen rocks like a quiet blanket. Jacob moved carefully, each step crunching under his boots. Lyra walked close beside him, her small hand gripping his tightly. Sella was asleep on his back, wrapped in thick cloth and strapped to him with rope. Their faces were red from the wind, but they kept moving. The sky above them was gray, and the air was thin. They had entered the frozen tunnel system, a path long forgotten, once used during the war, now buried by time and weather. Jacob remembered the old maps, the warnings, the narrow paths between cliffs. It was dangerous, but it was their best chance to avoid the patrols. Behind them, the Queen's enemy general, Thoros, was still hunting. He had sent out false orders commanding the wrong sectors to be searched. He didn't want the girls found. He wanted power, the throne, and the fall of Queen Varaya. And now, one human stood in his way. The wind howled louder as the storm picked up. Lyra stumbled and fell to her knees. Jacob turned quickly, lifted her gently, and brushed snow from her face. "We stop soon," he said, pointing toward a rocky hill up ahead. She nodded weakly, her cheeks wet with snow and tears. They reached a broken wall of stone and found the entrance to an old war shelter. Jacob kicked the ice off the door and pushed it open. It creaked and groaned, but it held inside. The air was dry and cold, but safe. He sealed the door behind them and set the girls down on a metal bench. Sella stirred in her sleep, her lips whispering something in her language. Jacob quickly unpacked his tools and built a small fire in the center pit. The orange glow lit up the room, chasing away the cold. He warmed his hands, then gently rubbed the girl's fingers and toes. Slowly, color returned to their skin. The warmth brought peace. Lyra sat quietly beside the fire, staring into the flames. Jacob handed her a hot cup filled with broth. She took it carefully and drank without speaking. Sela sat in Jacob's lap, yawning as he held her close. For the first time in days, they were still, no running, no hiding. Just a quiet fire and the sound of wind outside. Lyra looked at Jacob and said, "Mother make fire like this?" Jacob nodded and smiled. "Your mother, the queen." Lyra hesitated, then said softly, "She'll sing when firelight." Sing soft words. Jacob leaned closer. "Can you sing it?" Lyra looked down, shy at first, but then began to hum a melody. It was soft and haunting, like a lullaby lost in time. Sela joined in, her tiny voice matching her sister's tune. Jacob closed his eyes, letting the song carry him to another world. Then he opened his eyes and stared at the flames. "I will get you home," he whispered, mostly to himself. No matter what it cost him, he would deliver them to the queen, but not until they were safe, truly safe. He reached into his bag and pulled out the data chip again. He stared at the image of General Thoros, the man behind it all. Jacob knew what men like Thoros were capable of. He had seen it during the war ambition that destroyed entire cities. And now, that ambition threatened to children who had done nothing wrong. He burned the memory into his mind. The queen needed to see it, but she couldn't trust her own people. That's why Jacob had to make it all the way himself. No messages, no signals, just his own 2 feet and a blaster if needed. Later that night, as the girls slept by the fire, Jacob stood near the shelter door. He looked out through a crack in the metal and saw nothing but white wind. He checked his rifle, reloaded it slowly. He didn't trust the silence, not in a world this dangerous. Suddenly, a red blinking light appeared on his wristband. A motion sensor he planted near the entrance had been triggered. Jacob moved fast, sliding across the shelter and putting his body between the girls and the door. His heart pounded in his chest, but then the light stopped and the signal faded. False alarm, maybe an animal, maybe just wind. Still, it reminded him peace never lasted long out here. He had to keep moving, no matter how tired they all were. In the morning, the storm calmed. The world outside looked softer, brighter, almost safe. Jacob wrapped the girls in warmer coats and packed the last of the supplies. He gave them a small breakfast and filled their flasks. Before they left, Lyra handed Jacob a tiny broken toy she had carried in her pocket. It was shaped like a moon, half cracked. "For you," she said, pressing it into his hand. Jacob didn't speak. His throat tightened too much. He only nodded and placed it in his own coat pocket, next to the chip. They stepped outside once. Again, wind at their backs, snow beneath their feet, toward the next ridge, toward the Queen's border, and toward a truth that could either save an empire, destroy it. The sky above them was no longer calm. Black shapes moved in the clouds, drones, patrol ships, and hunter crafts. Jacob looked up from the rocky trail. Shielding his eyes from the glare, they were getting close to the Queen's border camp. But so was everyone else. The enemy was closing in, faster than he expected. He held Lyra's hand firmly as they climbed the steep mountain path. Sela rode on his back again, wrapped in thick blankets, sleeping softly. They were tired, hungry, and cold, but they didn't stop. Jacob knew they couldn't afford to, not now, not with traitors hunting them. Not with the queen still unaware of the true danger. As they reached a flat plateau, Jacob pulled out a small device, a locator beacon. He adjusted it carefully and sent out a burst of encrypted code. Just once. Just for a second, hoping the Queen's loyal forces would catch it. Then he destroyed the device, tossing the pieces into the snow. No trace, no signal to track, only the wind and the clouds above. Suddenly, the silence broke. 3 dark hovercrafts roared over the cliffs. Scanning the ground below, Jacob grabbed Lyra and pulled her behind a rock. He crouched low, heart pounding. As the ships passed above them, their searchlights swung slowly across the landscape. Hunting anything that moved, one spotlight paused over their location. Jacob held his breath, covering the girls with his body. But then, just as quickly, the light passed. The ships continued forward, toward the western valley. Jacob waited another minute before speaking. "Come on," he whispered. "We keep going." They followed an old war trail, barely visible beneath snow and ice. Jacob had used it once. During a retreat years ago, it would lead them to a supply station. And beyond that, a tunnel to the Queen's border wall. The path was narrow, carved into the side of a frozen cliff. One wrong step could mean falling into the valley below. As they moved, Lyra began to hum again. A quiet song, the same one her mother used to sing. Jacob smiled faintly, her voice a reminder that hope still lived in the middle of all this. He stopped to catch his breath and looked at the pendant around Lyra's neck. It was glowing softly, responding to something nearby. He remembered the tech royal blood carried bio-locked signatures. And certain doors like border tunnels opened only to them. They were close now. Close enough for the pendant to activate. Jacob turned to Lyra. "Your mother is near," he said. The girl's eyes lit up, and for the first time, she smiled. Without fear, but danger was not far behind them. Distant roars echoed from the valley. Jacob turned his scope toward the sound and saw shadows moving quickly. Not wild beasts, not soldiers. Bounty hunters on speed bikes, flying. Low across the ice, he cursed under his breath and picked up the pace. "Run," he said, lifting Sela into his arms and urging Lyra forward. They sprinted along the edge of the mountain, snow flying beneath their feet. The cave entrance appeared ahead, half covered in frozen rubble. Jacob fired his blaster at the ice wall, blasting open a path. Lyra crawled inside first, then Sela. Then Jacob, just as the bounty hunters reached the trail behind them. Inside, the air was warm and still. Ancient lights flickered to life as they moved deeper into the tunnel. Symbols of the Zathari Empire glowed on the walls. Jacob looked up. Recognizing the royal seal, this was part of the Queen's old escape network. He had found it once by accident during the war. Now it was saving them, but the tunnel was not empty. A faint sound echoed through the corridor, footsteps, multiple sets. Jacob pulled Lyra and Sela into a side alcove and raised his weapon. Figures appeared in the distance, shadowed by the flickering light. But instead of black armor, they wore white, with the Queen's sigil glowing on their chests. Royal guards, Jacob stepped out slowly. Hands raised. "I have the princesses," he said firmly. The guards aimed at him instantly, but then paused. As Lyra ran out from hiding, she shouted something in her native tongue and pointed to Jacob. The guards lowered their weapons in shock, then activated their comms in the sky far above. Queen Varia stood in her command ship, watching the live feed. When she saw her daughter step out from behind the human, her knees buckled, tears welled in her eyes. And she gripped the rail tightly. She whispered, "They're alive. Bring them to me," she ordered, her voice trembling with emotion. "Bring him too." As Jacob stood surrounded by guards, he felt his muscles finally relax. He looked. down at Lyra and Sella, who now stood holding each other's hands. He had done it. He had crossed the cliffs, the snow, the fire, and the sky. Now, the real battle of the truth was about to begin, and Jacob knew one thing. If the queen didn't believe him, if the traitors got to her first, then everything he had done would be for nothing. But he wasn't afraid. Not anymore. He had something. Stronger than fear-proof, the royal ship was larger than anything Jacob had ever seen. Its silver body hovered silently over the snowy cliffs, engines humming like a distant thunder. Soldiers in white armor surrounded him, holding their weapons low but ready. The two girls stood between them, holding tightly to Jacob's hands. Even now, after all that had happened, they didn't want to let go. The transport doors opened with a hiss, and a woman stepped out, Queen Virea, tall and regal, her robe glowing with threads of light. Her face was calm, but her eyes were full of storm. She walked straight toward her daughters, arms trembling but open wide. Lyra ran into her mother's embrace, sobbing loudly. Sella followed, whispering, "Amma, Amma," over and over again. The queen held them close, tears running down her face. But when her eyes rose to Jacob, they changed, from soft to sharp, from mother to ruler. "Who are you?" she asked, her voice cold as the wind. "Why were my daughters with you?" Jacob didn't move. He reached slowly into his coat and pulled out the data chip. "This," he said, "is why." A guard snatched it from his hand and handed it to the queen. She placed it into her wrist console and projected the image into the air. The scene played in silence, masked figures speaking in dark corners. The voice of General Thoros, clear as fire. "She'll never know. The throne will be ours." Gasps filled the air. Soldiers looked at each other, some backing away. Queen Vera's face turned pale, her hands shaking. One of her guards stepped forward. "Your Highness, we must act." But she raised her hand to silence him. Then she turned back to Jacob. "You protected them," she said quietly. Jacob gave a single nod. "I found them half dead in the wilds," he replied. "They were alone, hunted, freezing. I couldn't walk away." The queen studied him for a long time. She saw the bruises on his face, the cuts on his arms, the burn marks from blaster fire. She saw her daughters clinging to him like he was their only shield. And finally, she saw what she feared most: truth. She lowered her eyes. Ashamed, "I trusted Thoros," she whispered. "He held my children in his arms. He swore to protect them." Jacob spoke calmly. "People like him wear honor like a mask. They only take it off when no one's looking." But the peace didn't last long. Before the queen could respond, an explosion rocked the mountain. Guards fell, ships tilted, alarms blared. Jacob grabbed the girls and pulled them behind a crate. Above, enemy ships poured in like wasps, black and fast. It was Theros. He had seen the feed. He had followed the signal, and now he was here to erase the evidence and the witnesses. The queen shouted orders, her voice strong again. "Protect the children. Defend the truth." Guards rushed to their stations. Turrets rose from the ground. But Thoros had come with mercenaries, traitors, and warbots. This was a war now, not a rescue. Jacob looked at the girls. They were shaking, terrified. He touched Lyra's cheek and said, "Stay with your mother. Don't let go." Then he stood, grabbed his rifle, and ran into the fire. Blaster shots lit the air like lightning. Jacob moved fast, firing, dodging, shielding the queen's guards as they tried to hold the line. One mercenary aimed for the ship's engine. Jacob took him down with a single shot. Another moved toward the queen. Jacob tackled him to the ground. The fight was madness, but Jacob didn't stop. He had come this far. He had crossed deserts, climbed frozen cliffs, fought bounty hunters. He wasn't going to stop now. Above them, Thoros stepped out from his command ship. He wore dark armor and a mocking grin. "So this is the human everyone's talking about," he said, "one man protecting royalty. How noble, how stupid." Jacob aimed his rifle at him. "You're not walking away from this," he growled. Thoros laughed, then fired. The blast hit Jacob in the side. Throwing him back, he hit the ground hard, blood on his coat, but even as he fell, he raised his weapon and fired again. His shot struck Thoros in the chest. Cracking his armor, the Queen's guards seized the moment and surged forward. Thoros tried to run, but was surrounded and forced to the ground. The battle ended in smoke and sparks, and silence returned. Jacob lay on the ground, breathing hard. The Queen rushed to his side. Her daughters behind her. "Don't move," she said, pressing a healing patch to his wound. "You saved them. You saved all of us." Jacob gave a weak smile. "Guess I'm not just a scavenger anymore," he whispered. Then his eyes closed. The pain too strong, but he didn't fade. Just slept, for the first time in peace. Jacob opened his eyes slowly. The ceiling above him was gold and white, with glowing vines carved into crystal beams. He blinked, confused, then groaned as pain echoed through his side. He tried to sit up, but gentle hands pushed him back. "Rest." "Protector," said a calm voice beside him. It was a royal medic, dressed in silver robes. "You are in the Sky Palace, safe," the medic added. Jacob looked around, trying to piece it all together. The battle, the fire, the Queen's face. "The girls, Chrysid, all rushed back," he whispered. "The children. Lyra, Sella." "They're safe," said another voice, warm and proud. Queen Viraya stepped into the chamber, her daughters holding her hands. They ran to Jacob's bedside, smiling, their eyes full of light. Sella climbed up beside him and hugged his arm. Lyra placed something in his hand. It was the broken moon-shaped toy she had given him. Jacob smiled, weak but real. He looked at the Queen, still unsure where he stood. "I'm just a man who got lucky," he said. "No," the Queen replied firmly. "You are the reason they are alive." She raised a glowing seal from her belt and held it above Jacob in Zethari law. "There are few greater titles than Protector of the Realm," she said. "You now hold that title." Gasps filled the chamber. Advisors, guards, and nobles watched in stunned silence. A human, once a scavenger, was now part of the royal legacy. Jacob tried to sit again, but the Queen placed a hand on his shoulder. "You have done enough," she said gently. "Let us carry the weight for now." Later that evening, Jacob stood on a royal balcony. He wore formal robes, unfamiliar and heavy, but beside him stood Lyra and Sella, dressed in fine silks, holding his hands without fear. The city of Valmora Prime stretched below them, clean towers, shining bridges, and endless lights. The Queen stepped beside him and whispered, "They told me humans were selfish, violent, without honor." She looked at him with a soft smile. "But you? You gave me back my daughters when you could have taken the reward. Or run." Jacob chuckled quietly. "I didn't do it for gold or glory," he said. "I did it because no child should cry alone in the cold." In the days that followed, the empire changed. General Theros was arrested and exposed in front of the royal court. His secrets spilled across the empire like a broken dam. Other traitors were caught, and the Queen's house was rebuilt with truth and justice. Jacob was offered land, power, even command of royal forces, but he refused most of it. He asked only for a quiet place to live near the royal gardens, so he could watch the sky and drink tea with the two girls who had once been lost. Lyra and Sella visited him every morning. They brought him stories, songs, and drawings. Sometimes they just sat beside him in silence. He wasn't their father, but he was something just as sacred, their guardian, their friend, their human protector. The people of the Empire, alien and human alike, began to speak his name with respect. They told stories about the man who stood alone against bounty hunters, who carried royal blood through storms and mountains, who faced betrayal with nothing but honor and a broken rifle. Children played games in the streets, pretending to be Jacob the Protector. Sculptors carved his image in stone, placing it beside the heroes of old, and in the palace library, a golden book was added the day the human saved the queen's heart. Jacob didn't care about the statues or songs. He cared about quiet mornings, the laughter of children, the warmth of fire. He cared about peace, earned not through battle, but through kindness. One evening, as the sun dipped below the twin moons, Queen Virea walked beside him in the garden. The flowers glowed in the twilight, and the air smelled of sweet mist. She looked at Jacob and said, "Do you regret saving them?" He turned to her, eyes soft. "Not for a second," he said. She nodded, her face quiet with understanding. "They love you, you know," she added. "I can see it in their eyes." Jacob looked toward the palace where Lyra and Sella were waving. From a window, he raised a hand, smiled, and whispered, "I love them too." The queen stepped closer and said, "You may not be Zathari by blood, Jacob, but you've proven something greater. You are one of us by heart." And as night fell over Valmora Prime, the stars shone a little brighter. Not because of power or war or thrones, but because one human had chosen to protect two aliens children, and in doing so, changed the fate of an empire forever.